Hey children, today I'm going to finish this story that I started yesterday. It's from this book, Jesus, the Friend of Children, and it's a retelling of the Bible stories for children. It was illustrated by Richard and Frances Hook, and they did a good job with the illustrations. Last time, you might remember, we finished on this page. I could only imagine what it felt like for Jesus' followers when they saw him hanging on the cross. All their hopes were dashed, and they were so sad and so grieved and so heartbroken, they didn't know what to do. They went back to a house and they locked the door, and they just cried and cried and cried. Well, several days passed. Jesus' body had been put in a tomb and a big stone rolled in front of it. And then came Sunday morning. And here is the story about that. The happiest day. It was early morning. The sky was dark and the city of Jerusalem was still. Two women hurried down the street. The whole world seems as sad as we are, Mary Magdalene said to her friend Mary. Mary was sad, but she was angry too. How could those wicked men put Jesus to death? She asked. They were afraid people would obey Jesus instead of them, Mary Magdalene answered. Then suddenly, she stopped for a minute. Who will roll the stone away from Jesus' tomb? She asked. If we can't get into the tomb, how can we put our spices on Jesus' body? But the women did not have to worry, for when they came to the tomb, it was open. An angel sat on the big stone beside it. It was like looking at a beautiful bright light, for the angel's face shone, and his robes were glistening white like snow. Don't be afraid, the angel said. Jesus is risen. Go, tell the disciples that Jesus is risen. The women were still afraid, but they were excited too. They turned and ran back the way they had come. On the way, they met Jesus. He greeted them in his kindly way, and they fell down and worshiped him. Then Jesus said, Go, tell my friends that I will meet them in Galilee. Now it was the brightest, happiest day in all the world. What wonderful news we have to tell, the women cried. Jesus is alive. Can you imagine how they felt? They thought he was dead and they wouldn't see him, and then they found him alive. All their hope, all their faith, all their joy completely renewed. Here's a picture of what somebody thought it might have looked like. You see, there's this man right here. He's the angel. And those are the two Marys coming down the steps. These people lying down, those were the soldiers who were guarding the tomb, and they had all fallen asleep. The angel made them fall asleep when he moved the stone. Jesus is alive. It was early in the morning when Mary Magdalene came running to the disciples with the most wonderful news in all the world. Jesus is risen. I saw him in the garden. He talked to me. That evening, the disciples, except Thomas, gathered together in a room to talk about Mary's news. The door was locked because they were afraid Jesus' enemies might find them and kill them. While they were talking, Jesus came and stood in the room. The men were afraid. Could this be a spirit? Why are you afraid? Jesus asked. Here, look at my hands. Look at my feet. A spirit does not have skin and bones. How happy the disciples were, for now they too had seen Jesus. They knew he was alive. Later they told Thomas. Remember, Thomas wasn't there. Later they told Thomas, but Thomas only shook his head. I can't believe that Jesus is alive, and I won't believe unless I can see the prints of the nails in his hands. A week later, must have been a hard week for Thomas. A week later, Thomas was with the disciples. Again, the door was locked, and again, Jesus came to them. Jesus knew that Thomas did not believe, so he said, Thomas, reach out your finger and touch the prints of the nails in my hands. Touch the place where the spear cut into my side. Thomas looked up at Jesus. Suddenly he knew, my Lord and my God, he cried. Jesus answered in his gentle way, Thomas, you believe because you have seen me. Blessed are the people who have not seen me, yet believe in me. We've not seen Jesus, but if we believe in him, we know that he will bless us too. Breakfast by the lake. Have you ever been to a lake or an ocean? Have you ever eaten breakfast out on the sand? That's what's going to happen here. Jesus' helpers. Oh wait, I think I forgot to show you this picture. I'm sorry. Here's the picture. See? There's Jesus. Who do you think this is? I think it's Thomas. And Jesus is showing him his hands so Thomas can believe. Jesus' helpers were waiting for him in the country by the lake. After a while, Peter started to wade out into the water. I'm going fishing, he said. I'll go with you, John said. And so will I, said another, and then another. Soon 7 men were in the boat. They fished all night, but they didn't catch any fish. At daylight, they turned their boat back toward the land. How do you think they were feeling? Tired, discouraged, maybe wondering what their lives were supposed to be now? They used to be fishermen. Now what were they going to do? They couldn't even catch any fish that night. But listen to what happened. Have you caught anything? A voice called out. Peter and the others looked. They saw a man standing on the shore. No, they shouted back. Throw your net over the right side of the boat, the man called. At first, the fishermen thought, what's the use? But there was something about the voice that made them obey. Almost at once, the net was full of fish. John looked toward the man on the shore. Peter, John cried, it's the Lord! Peter was so excited, he jumped into the water and swam to shore. Do you think you would have jumped into the water? I think I would have. The others brought the boat in, dragging the net of fish behind them. Look, one of the fishermen said, Jesus has built a fire and cooked breakfast. That's amazing for Jesus. The God of the universe, the maker of all things, to humble himself and cook breakfast. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Peter, take care of my friends. Then Jesus left them, but the men were not sad. Jesus promised to see them again, and Jesus always keeps his promises. Here's the picture of the fishermen. See? Don't know if you can see here the big front part. This man laying down, it's Jesus. And there's the fire pit, you see? And the fish being cooked. Back to heaven. Jesus is alive. His helpers told the wonderful news to all of his friends in the country by the sea. Alive? His friends asked in surprise. How can that be? Jesus was put to death on a cross. How can a man who was dead come back to life? And Jesus is not a man like any of us, the helpers said. He is God's Son, and God brought him back to life. We know it. We have seen him. The wonderful news spread. Soon people were shouting, "We're going to see Jesus!" They sat down on a hillside covered with grass and flowers, and Jesus came to them. "Go and teach the people everywhere all the things I have taught you," Jesus said. How happy the people were. They listened and promised to obey. One day, Jesus took his special helpers to a place called the Mount of Olives. It had been about 6 weeks since he rose from the dead. At the top of the mountain, Jesus blessed them, just as he had blessed the little children who wanted to be near him. And while Jesus was blessing them, a strange thing happened. He was taken up into the sky. The men watched. A cloud covered Jesus. He was gone from their sight. Jesus had returned to heaven to be with God his Father. But Jesus' helpers were not afraid. They knew Jesus would always be near them, and someday they would be with him again. Here's what it might have looked like that day when Jesus went up. And that's the end of the book. I love you all. Have a beautiful day. Bye-bye.